Last Sunday, we began a discussion of faith and doubt. Let's quickly review some of what we discussed and then go on from there. James 5:11. As you know, we count as blessed those who have persevered. You have heard of Job's perseverance and have seen that what the Lord finally brought about. The Lord is full of compassion and mercy. We spent some time talking about the story of Job and how James uses Job as an example of perseverance, or as we're used to calling it, patience. The legendary patience of Job. Someone might say, one must have the patience of Job to put up with him. I'll let you decide whether I'm talking about the Tuckers or the Beans. Job wasn't patient in the way that we normally use the word patient. By patience, we usually mean compliant, accepting, non-complaining, and Job is the opposite of that. He complains the whole time. 5 times in the book, he talks about my complaint. He says things like, I loathe my very life, therefore I will give free rein to my complaint and speak out in bitterness of my soul. Chapter 10, verse 1. Job was patient, but only in the way that James intends it. Endurance, perseverance. He wasn't accepting or quiet in his ordeal. He screamed bloody murder, but he endured to the end, and that is what God has blessed. Doesn't his carping and complaining come across, though, at times as expressing doubt? Faith sounds like the Lord gives and the Lord takes away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. That's what we like about Job, and that's what we sing about in our praise songs. But many of the things that Job says in his book sounds a lot more like doubt. Chapter 21, verse 4. Is my complaint directed to a human being? Why should I not be impatient? Look at me and be appalled. Clap your hand over your mouth. When I think about this, I am terrified. Trembling seizes my body. What would you call that if you don't call it doubt? Well, maybe we should call it prayer. He says that he directs his complaint not to human beings, but to God himself. It's prayer, and prayer is always about faith. You don't cry out to somebody who you don't believe to be there. Job was able to persevere because he did cry out to God. Sometimes his crying out doesn't sound like confidence or great faith, but doubt, when it's expressed, when we cry it out, that is a type of faith. That is part of faith. That's what we were calling the faith of the doubter. Doubt is a part of faith. Last Sunday night, we mentioned 6 types of doubts, or at least 6 things that can cause doubt. The first we called personal doubt, where we doubt ourselves. I'm not good enough, or I don't know enough, or I'm not able to, or why am I, all of those things. And then there was what we called situational doubt. That was what Job went through. When the world falls on you and you don't know what to make of it, that leads to doubt. And then there's what we might call moral doubt. Why is it that I keep falling in this same hole over and over again? Why can't I overcome this habitual sin? And then there's unrealistic doubt. There we suggested that the doubt is not in God, but rather in our misunderstanding of what faith really is. If we assume that faith leaves no room for weakness, then we are bound to go through times of doubt and contemplation. And then theological doubt. There are times when we study and we come to change our views about things. Well, if one of those things that we change our views on is a long-held, very central belief, then that can cause a crisis of faith. And then there is what we call deep, dark doubt, where we doubt God's goodness, or that he cares about us, or maybe even that he's even there. Tonight we want to look at a quick case study in the book of Mark. This is the story of a father whose son is possessed by a demon. Jesus tells him that anything is possible to ones who believe, and the father of the demoniac says, I believe, help my unbelief. Well, we're going to read that text in a minute, but notice something about the context of that section in Mark 8 and 9. The context leading up to this story is almost like a preview of the story itself. It's almost as if Mark is illustrating our point for us. First, there is Peter's confession, "Who do you say that I am?" And Peter jumps right in to confess Jesus as the Christ. But that is immediately followed by regression, where when Jesus predicts his coming death, it's Peter that calls him aside and chastises him for being mistaken about his prediction. And then there is, at the beginning of chapter 9, the transfiguration, this mountaintop experience where the apostles Peter, James, and John witness the transformation of Jesus into a spiritual reality where he appears with Moses and Elijah, which immediately leads to the wrong figuration. Peter figures the reason that they're there is so that they can build 3 tabernacles so they can honor or even worship these 3 men. God has to hit the buzzer and said, "Wrong. This is my beloved Son in whom I'm well pleased. Listen to him." Immediately after that story is the story of the demoniac and the father and his faith and doubt. The rest of the apostles try to heal this boy with the demon. They're arguing with the scribes as Jesus finally appears. The father ignores the commotion and comes up to Jesus himself. We pick up the reading in the middle of verse 22. "But if you can do anything, take pity on us and help us." Verse 23, "If you can," says Jesus, "everything is possible for the one who believes." Immediately the boy's father exclaimed, "I do believe. Help me overcome my unbelief." He does confess his faith. "I do believe." That is expressed emphatically, that faith is real. But he also confesses his doubt. "Help me overcome my unbelief." He had faith, but his faith was imperfect and incomplete. There's a perfectly good Bible word that applies to a faith that is weak, incomplete, and imperfect. That Bible word is faith. Faith doesn't have to be perfect in order to work. The process of working through doubts is a process of faith. Romans 15 verses 1 and 2. "We who are strong ought to bear with the failings of the weak and not to please ourselves. Each of you should please our neighbors for their good, to build them up." Why should the strong bear with the weak? Because the weak faith is faith. The people with weak faith have a working faith, and God wants us working together, not against one another. Now, what Paul says here is the beginning of a conclusion of a discussion that he begins at the beginning of chapter 14. Romans 14 verse 1, "Except the one whose faith is weak, without quarreling over disputable matters. One person's faith allows him to eat anything, but another whose faith is weak eats only vegetables." Okay, the question that Paul is dealing with, is it okay or not okay to eat meat that may or may not have been dedicated to idols and then sold on the open market? Paul's answer is basically, don't quarrel about it, and more importantly, don't judge each other based upon your answer. Some people have a weak faith. Their faith is not developed to the point where they cannot connect the meat to the worship of idols. And so in order to keep from worshiping idols, they forego eating meats altogether. Paul says, don't judge others based on that decision. They are making that decision in faith. Verse 3, "The one who eats everything must not treat with contempt the one that does not, and the one who does not eat everything must not judge the one who does, for God has accepted them." The one who eats everything, that is, the person that Paul would say has a stronger faith, are not to look down on those who are weaker and don't understand as much. Why does he say that? Because that's exactly the tendency that we have, to look down our nose at other people. The one who refuses to eat the meat, the one that Paul would say is weaker in the faith, is not to judge people that do eat the meat. Why does he say that? Because we tend to judge people who come down on different sides of issues than we do. The point here is that God has accepted both the weak and the strong. Faith does not have to be complete. It doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to be mature in order to be working Verse 4, who are you to judge someone else's servant? To their own master servants stand or fall, and they will stand, for the Lord is able to make them stand. Who will God make stand? Well, the ones that are strong and the ones that are weak. Weak faith is saving faith. When we struggle with our faith, and there will be times when we all will do that, when we struggle with our faith, it's because we have faith to struggle with. If Bible faith must be perfect in order to be saving faith, then any doubt whatsoever would negate the work of God. If I have to wonder that any time I struggle with any kinds of doubt in my spiritual life, does that mean that God has saved me? Does that mean my sins have been taken away? That's just going to set up a perpetual state of spiritual torture. That's true of ourselves. We're never going to have any confidence in God's love or salvation. And also our relationship with others. We'll kind of dismiss or condemn people that we see to be imperfect in their faith. And finally, the church itself will become just a group of insecure and unhappy folks. So what is it that we're supposed to do when we struggle for faith? What is it we're supposed to do when we start having doubts? How can I respond if I'm having something of a crisis of faith? How can I help someone else who is struggling with doubts? Well, I'm not going to tell you. That's what I want you to take a few minutes to discuss tonight as we continue.